Loved by all, loathed by none. Tim is most often the person in the room that takes us all through some very difficult times, whether it's helping the administration pull together the California Water Action Plan, helping to negotiate a successful Proposition 1, the water bond, and even more recently, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And those are three of the most recent achievements that Tim has helped Aqua continue to position in a leadership role for Southern California and all of California. So, Tim, please, your panel.
Thank you very much, Shane. Thanks. And thank you. We're running late, although I think it's important to point out we're running late because there's been so much really valuable information and such good speakers on the table. And to see this many people sitting in the audience still at this hour is encouraging. If I were going to summarize the morning was largely about what we've been doing right. I started in the water industry in the early 1980s when Complete the State Water Project was the vision of Southern California in the future. And if you compare that to now, think of all the presentations you just saw, how you have turned the world upside down from an import-dependent system into a resilient, locally driven system where you have created entire industries in Southern California. The same things happen in Northern California, by the way. My Southern members think they're the only ones that are doing it. My Northern members think they're the only ones that are doing it. Everybody has been doing it. We are an extraordinarily accomplished generation of water managers. We don't typically think of ourselves that way. There were the Mulhollans in previous generations, the O'Shaughnessy's, others that developed the system. They became famous. I like to point out to audiences, we don't have one or two of those. We've got scores, even hundreds of people who have taken risks to pull projects through, and that is why we've gotten through this drought so well in the past, over the past 5 years. But if this morning was about accomplishments and the things we have done, this panel that you're about to hear is about the challenges that still lay before us. The Delta, out-of-control regulations coming from both state and federal agencies, those are things that we have not yet managed today, as well as we've done other things. And you couldn't ask for a better panel to address the topic. Jeff, they're going to go in this order. Jeff Keitlinger is the general manager of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, another gentleman that doesn't need any introduction to a water audience, certainly not in Southern California. Brent Walthall, an old colleague of mine, I used to work together with almost everybody at the Metropolitan Water District, and Brent and I worked together on water transfers and water marketing in MWD. He is currently an assistant general manager with the Kern County Water Agency and a voice of reason coming from Central Valley Agriculture. And then last but not least, we have Jim Pfeiffer. Jim is with the City of Sacramento. He was my recommendation, frankly. I could have recommended a flamethrower. I could have recommended somebody who doesn't really care about what's going on in the state of California. But the City of Sacramento does care, and they're trying to find ways to be constructive. And so Jim's going to represent. He's going to try to represent all the northern views, but no one human being can do that. Let me start by taking you back to the Delta. The Delta has always been our hardest thing to resolve. I'm going to start here, and when the panel's done, I'm going to end on this note too. It is I work for a very diverse association. We represent the entire state: north, south, ag, urban, east, west, and we have demonstrated that it is possible for us all to be on the same page when it comes to the Delta. Back 3 or 4 years ago, when the Brown administration seemed to be headed down a path of Delta only, tunnels only, that was alarming to us at Aqua. We developed something we call the Statewide Water Action Plan. It closely reflects the governor's plan. His California Water Action Plan closely reflects what we call the SWAP. And we got 106 agencies from all over California. Many of you in this room, your boards voted to adopt resolutions to support that SWAP. So did the Northerners, recognizing that it included something like what at the time the acronym was BDCP. Now, that makes it clear to me, as long as we stay focused on a statewide program that's working for everyone, we can all get what we need, but that proves difficult. I mean, it really does prove difficult. And I think back, as most of you know, in my MWD years, I used to spend, 150% of my time on Delta issues. Now I only spend 20% of my time on Delta issues, and I'm so much happier. But one of the speakers this morning was Patrick Healy, reminded us all of I'm going to give you some acronyms. The PC, Peripheral Canal, 1982, overwhelmingly voted down by the voters of California. That was followed by the Double D, Duke's Ditch. The Bay Delta Accord was a brief moment of success that I think we need to figure out how we did that and get back to some of that. There's been CalFed, BDOC, BDAC, CBDA, DSC, BDCP. Why do we put ourselves through the torture of this alphabet soup? Because it's just like banging your head against the wall, or it seems that way. And the reason we keep doing it is simple. The Delta is really important. It's important to you in Southern California. It's important to the folks up in the Sacramento area. The Delta is the hub of the system. It is really important. So we have no choice but to keep banging our head against that wall until we get it right. The latest attempt to get it right, they call it WaterFix, which is accompanied by Echo Restore. I think we're going to focus our efforts on WaterFix. And WaterFix is now, all it does, it's really pretty simple. It moves the intake on these big projects. They're in the wrong place, and it's attempting to move them from a little river that can't handle them on up to a big river that can handle them. You'd think it'd be fairly straightforward. They're not increasing the capacity of the system. They're just moving where it takes water from, and you'd think World War III was happening, and maybe it is, in fact. But that's now before the State Board on a relatively straightforward manner to modify their water rights permits to allow them to take water from a different place. But there are 85 parties. We don't do anything small in California water. There are 85 parties to the proceeding. 68 of them have filed formal protests. 29 of those protests have been filed by Aqua members, City of Sacramento amongst them, who take their water upstream of the state and federal pumping facilities. So it's pretty clear that peace has not broken out quite yet. We're going to get the perspectives of each of the panelists and then come back. I've got some questions prepared of my own. We would like you to have questions. They're supposed to be really brief. We have, by the way, no PowerPoints. You'll be glad to hear that. No PowerPoints for you. They're supposed to take 6 minutes, give or take, a piece. I've got some questions, but what I'll mostly do is get to you guys for questions, and then I'll have some closing remarks, and we'll turn it back over to Brian. But don't forget, we still have the raffle to go. So with that, there is no podium, so you guys are going to speak from your seats. Jeff, Brent, and Jim in that order. Jeff?
All right, thank you, Tim. So Jeff Keitlinger, General Manager, Metropolitan Water District, Southern California. I'm going to just talk a little bit briefly about what we see coming for us and as we move forward here. Right now, Metropolitan provides Southern California with somewhere between 1.8 and 2 million acre feet of water a year. That's the demand on Metropolitan, and it works out to about 50% of, a little more than 50% of all of Southern California's demands. So we're supplying 19 million people here in Southern California across 6 counties, and we do half of it with local water. A lot of it, the groundwater basins, what rainwater we capture and put into those basins in San Gabriel, Orange County, San Fernando Valleys. And we do a good job with that. We also do a good job of providing conserving, recycled water, all those programs that enabled us to continue to grow and use the same amount of water. In 1990, we were 14 million people, and Metropolitan sold 2.4 million acre feet. We actually sell less water today, and we've added 5 million people. And that's a real success story that Tim was talking about with our local water supplies. But those 2 sources of imported water that Metropolitan provides that 2 million acre feet come from 2 places. They come from the Colorado River, and they come from Northern California through the State Water Project. And both of those sources have been pretty heavily stressed. The Colorado River went into drought in 2000. It's been in a nonstop 15-year drought. We're down to about 40% capacity on the Colorado River in terms of the reservoirs. We were at 100% in 2000. So we have slowly but surely eroded all that cushion on the Colorado River, dealing with the last decade and a half. And in fact, if we are on the verge of getting the first ever Secretary of Interior declared shortage on the Colorado River, which would impact Arizona primarily. But politically, it's going to be a big deal, and it's most likely, it's about a 60% chance likely it will happen, not in 2017, but in 2018. So in the next, it's not a matter of if, but when we go into shortage on the Colorado River, and that's going to be a big deal in the metropolitan world. Then we go north, 8 of the last 10 years have been in drought in Northern California, and we've been cut back somewhere around 25% of our supplies to deal with endangered species fish. So both our big arteries of imported supply are under heavy duress, heavy strain right now, and it's making it very hard. We don't have cushion on either system right now. So we're going to have to propose some fixes. We've got plans to help the Colorado River, sharing contingencies, cooperative measures that we'd be doing with Southern Nevada and doing with Arizona. But we also need the exact same thing in Northern California. We need some form of delta fix to recapture some of that lost supply, so firm up our reliability. So that's setting the stage for the challenges that Metropolitan still has to work through, continue to grow our local supplies, but find ways in which we can shore up some of that reliability of those really basic pillars of our water supply, those two big pillars of imported supply for Southern California.
I think you left a few minutes on the table.
That's my goal. I donate my time to Northern California.
Well, I might take it first, but we'll see. I'm Brent Walthall. I work for the Kern County Water Agency. We're located in and around the areas of Bakersfield, and we provide agricultural water to about 700,000 acres of farms, and also municipal water to the city of Bakersfield and the surrounding urban areas. And yes, there are surrounding urban areas in Bakersfield. The title of the panel is Challenges and Opportunities, so I'll mention a few of the challenges first. The folks we send most of our water to, about roughly 1 million acre feet a year, so about half of what Metropolitan does out of the State Water Project, is about running a business. Farmers are either, whether they're large corporate farms or small family farms, they run businesses. So they're susceptible to all the same kind of pressures that any business is. Cost increases, of course, chief among them. And farmers have been suffering some significant cost increases in recent years. The price of fuel, the price of water, the price of labor, all of these things continue to go up, and they affect farmers, particularly smaller farmers, the most. And that's not a surprise to anybody who's run a business. Those kind of inputs to your business, to your bottom line, are significant in your success. At the same time, they've been experiencing the same reduced water supply that Jeff just referred to. On the State Water Project, our supplies have been cut by somewhere between 25 and 40% to meet environmental regulations out of the Delta. So solving the Delta would actually be a big step forward to securing a reliable water supply, and we recognize that. They've also suffered losses of water supply for other reasons. The recently enacted Sustainable Groundwater Management Act affects us significantly. We're in what's known as a critically overdrafted basin, largely because we use it. We like that empty space to some degree because we have very significant groundwater banking programs. In wet years, we take that extra surplus water and we put it in the ground for dry years. So we don't mind having a little extra space, but right now we've got a little too much extra space in the groundwater. The drought has impacted that, and our own use has impacted that. In addition to that, the continuing implementation of additional regulations is becoming a problem as well. On the horizon, we see an additional restriction in water supplies coming south of the Delta, reserving those supplies for environmental purposes. We don't see that dynamic letting up anytime in the near future. And largely the reason is because we're not solving the Delta problem. Whether it's an infrastructure problem or a biological problem, we're not solving either. So to the extent we don't solve that problem, we would expect those regulations to continue to tighten and our water supplies to continue to decrease. So for us, solving the Delta, again, a very high priority. Let's talk about some of the opportunities. For agriculture, the opportunities are not limited. Water conservation is always our first recourse. And although I think Tim mentioned this, people always think we're conserving, why isn't everybody else? And we heard this a lot during the last year, that urban areas were conserving, but ag wasn't required to. That was true only on paper, because agriculture conserves not because they're directed to, but because it's one of the largest single cost inputs to any farm. So they do it every year, all the time, because it's the economically smart thing for them to do on a daily basis. And we've seen very aggressive conservation in our area, up to and including completely getting rid of the crop. The micro drip in our area is very extensive, largely because as a state water contractor, we pay the full cost for water. So the cost incentive has always been paramount for our farmers to conserve water. The drip irrigation, as I mentioned, is extensive. Someone once calculated it once, and the amount of drip tape installed just in Kern County would circle the globe 9 times. That's a lot of drip tape. But if you've driven through Kern County on the 5, You've seen those rows and rows and rows of trees, and so you know that you could probably get 9 times around the world with some of the drip tape installed in those farms. Other things are more aggressive, particularly with respect to how they handle the crops themselves. For example, another thing we hear in the media all the time is that going up and down the 5, you look and they're still planting trees. Why are they still planting trees? I drive the 5 all the time. I live in Sacramento and I work in, go to Bakersfield for work twice a month. And what I see is we've been removing old trees, trees that have reached their life expectancy and are started on the downward slope of the yield curve. In other words, their crop is becoming less each year, yet they're large trees, so they take a lot of water. Once that happens, you've got a tree taking a lot of water and producing a lower level of yield, it's time to get rid of that crop. So what they do, they get rid of those trees and they plant new trees. If you've seen the new trees, what do they look like? They look like sprigs. They've got like 5 leaves on them in the first few years. And as a result, they use very little water. So although some people look at that as a water conservation error, it's actually an increase in water conservation for us. You've gotten rid of old trees that use a lot of water. You've replaced them with young trees that use a little bit of water. Okay, so how about in the future? You're just planting more crops for the next 20 years. Yes, farmers are optimists. They all have farms. Many of them have family farms. They would like to continue farming in the future. I can't blame them for wanting to continue their own businesses. The other thing I would mention as far as optimism is concerned is something that Jeff didn't mention, but I know his agency is very focused on, and that's the science of the Delta. I think we've come to understand that over the course of the last 20 years, the science that's being relied on in the Delta to set the rules and regulations for its operation have not worked. And I don't think any reasonable person can argue with that point. We have not seen any increase in the species that we're concerned about, particularly the smelt or the salmon. And as a result, we need to change the way we approach that. Jeff's agency, in concert with other agencies, mine included, have started to invest in science programs that are not run by the regulatory agencies. And at first we were concerned, you're just going to be called tobacco scientists. So what we did was we set up a firewall to be sure that our agencies that are working on science, those scientists, we have tasked specifically to look at unexplored areas of biological inquiry in the Delta, are separate from the way we operate our agencies. In other words, they make their own decisions on what science to pursue. And we've seen some benefit from this. Just recently this summer, the federal agencies proposed an action that would provide water in the summer for outflow for fish. And we looked at the data and said, there's nothing in here to support a connection between that increased outflow and increased fish. Going through some of the science that we had developed, that Jeff's agency had developed, we realized that was scientifically, we could show that there was at least as much chance that they were going to harm the fish as improve the status of the fish. In the end, they didn't do that particular action for a variety of reasons, but we'd like to think that the science that we've developed over the course of the last 5 or 7 years is starting to turn the tide. It's included in more decisions recently, and it's changing how biologists look at the Delta. We think that can only be a good thing, and that's a reason for optimism. So with that, I think I've used a couple of your minutes, so I'll stop there and turn it over to Jim.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. Again, I am Jim Piper. I'm with the City of Sacramento, and I've been asked to present the Northern California perspective on water supply in the Delta. I'll first discuss some of the diversity in Northern California amongst water agencies, and then some of the concerns over the Delta and why the City of Sacramento and others are protesting the water fix. I'll finish by giving some thoughts on the path forward together. Much like Southern California, Northern California is diverse. The north part of the state consists of different water purveyors, different missions such as agricultural or urban, different types of water rights and entitlements. Geography plays an important role in this, such as what watershed a water agency might be in. Regulatory requirements sometimes heighten conflicts amongst these agencies and work to pit one against the other. With all of this, there are several different perspectives on water and we don't always agree. So I guess I'm giving a perspective on water, not necessarily the perspective, but I think I can bring together some common threads and discuss them at large. We are, I have to say that we're working better together in Northern California than any other time I have known in the past. We're talking and listening to one another and working to resolve tensions that occur in Northern California. It's hard but necessary work. One part of Northern California merits special discussion in this, though, and it's the Delta. It's a collection of farmers, water users, residents, county governments, and other stakeholders. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is they tend to get a lot of attention, and they have a different perspective than a lot of other parts of Northern California. For those of us living and working in the Sacramento region, Delta problems hit close to home. Most of the water that flows to the Delta passes by our front door on the Sacramento and American rivers. The Sacramento River and its tributaries support family farms, wildlife and fish habitat, recreation, hydropower, and the population surrounding the Sacramento region. But it wasn't really until the last 2 decades that water supply issues posed by a troubled delta began to impact those of us north of the delta. Now, problems from the delta threaten water supplies both north and south. And the delta is a shared concern amongst all of us, and we must work together to resolve them. But more on that in just a minute. I'd like to take a moment to explain a little bit more about what Northern California fears. And that is draining the reservoirs to a point that we don't have access to water. So how does this really work? Well, if reservoirs are brought down or emptied during the summer and fall, or perhaps spring, and there is insufficient precipitation the following winter, Northern California reservoirs would be left with just enough water to meet environmental needs, or could be left with just enough water to meet environmental needs and not for agriculture and municipal needs. This underlies a huge tension between Northern and Southern California. Generally, as I understand it, export regions, I think you guys call yourselves import regions, don't want water stranded in reservoirs in the north part of the state, and they want that water moved so it can be moved across the delta and pumped. Northern California, once again, does not want the reservoir levels to get so low that consumptive uses cannot be met. One of the things that we learned from the WaterFix environmental documents was that Folsom and Shasta reservoirs would be potentially drained 1 year out of 10 in the future, largely due to climate change. This is a pretty bleak prospect. I mean, think about that for a minute. In my region, Folsom Reservoir is the water supply for about 1.5 million people. And that's about the same population or pretty close to the San Gabriel Valley. And could you imagine a situation where from around the end of September until it started raining again, there wasn't enough water to meet those demands? What would it be like? The impacts on the community? Would a business want to go there? How would it impact fish? The consequences would be really catastrophic. Okay, so why is the city of Sacramento protesting? So the state of California and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation have said that they are not injuring any other user of water. They are simply constructing a new diversion point north of the delta, and no changes are being proposed on how those reservoirs are being operated. And when I say the reservoirs, Shasta, Oroville, Folsom Reservoir, I've heard this said by several officials at DWR and the California Natural Resources Agency, and I believe they are being sincere when they say this. However, there's a disconnect between the analysis for WaterFix and what the officials are saying. Our experts have dug into the WaterFix analysis, and they have found that the reservoirs are assumed to be operated aggressively to make that project work. Again, there's a disconnect between what the state officials are telling us and what we're finding in the analysis. Now, I'm not suggesting there's a conspiracy in all this. I can appreciate that these studies are very, very hard to perform, and there's a lot of people involved. And this is just part of the give and take of making sure that these projects work well. In my opinion, the first step in the path forward is to resolve the protest. That includes negotiating an operations agreement for the reservoirs that does not leave Northern California without water. This is job number one. In Northern California, we knew that we would be having this conversation sooner or later, and we've been getting ready for it. We have some thoughts on how to make sure that we can continue to get water to Southern California without draining those reservoirs. We're ready for this dialogue. But I'm also appreciative that Metropolitan and the state water contractors have also anticipated this, and they have come to talk to us. This is nice. WaterFix is not the scariest thing to Northern California water managers, though. Rather, it's a dull-sounding regulatory proceeding that is underway called the Bay Delta Water Quality Plan Update. And it's been said a couple times earlier today. I think there was a question in the audience about it, on how it would affect WaterFix. A leading idea among the regulatory agencies is releasing a large amount of water in the spring in order to help the delta. But in our view, it could lead to reservoirs being drained in the fall. If the plan is not done right, it risks damaging the economy of the state and shifting environmental impacts from the delta to the upstream tributaries. If not done right, it will impact the water supply for both South and Northern California. Okay, so where do we go from here? First and most importantly, we need to work together. That involves discussing our issues openly and to find ways to move forward. Working together needs to be coupled with appearing united. If we appear divided, that'll give others the opportunity to come in and say water suppliers just don't have their act together, and they'll impose solutions that are not reflective of our needs. The second thing we need to do is work on all the elements of the California Water Action Plan, which Tim had talked about earlier. Not just parts that the administration like, or that water suppliers like, or environmental NGOs like best. The plan needs to continue to be comprehensive, and the water suppliers need to inform that process collectively. We need to construct infrastructure to meet the needs of the environment and water users. This includes new storage above and below ground. Sites Reservoir in the Sacramento Valley is one example, but the Sacramento region is also in the early stages of developing a federally acknowledged groundwater bank that could have benefits within the American River region and to other regions in the state. We need to continue our downward trend in water use. Like you, we are committed to water use efficiency, not just during the drought, but for the long term. So the Sacramento region has been decreasing its water use for more than a decade, and we plan on continuing to do that. We need to invest more in alternative supplies, capturing stormwater, constructing recycled water facilities, and so on. And in that vein, we applaud Metropolitan for its recent decision to develop alternative supplies to imported water. And then lastly, we need to improve conveyance across the Delta. Sometimes we feel that Southern California guesses at what Northern California wants or needs. I ask that you talk to us. When I started my remarks, I talked about Northern California working together to solve its water issues. I think we need to roll this up on a statewide scale and work together as one. Okay, to sum it all up, problems in the Delta threaten water supplies both south and north. It's a shared concern. We need an operations plan. This is a key to resolving conflict, particularly in the near term. We need to work together on important policy issues like the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. We need to talk openly. We need to be united. And we need to build the water structure to support California's economy and environment. And all of this is going to be hard work, but it's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Now, we're supposed to have a couple of walking mics out there. There's one. Is there another one? David DePinto, do you know if we're, I thought we had two? Okay, and young lady in blue, she's got a mic. This gentleman's got a mic. So get their attention and bring a mic to yourself. If you want to ask a question, probably just raise your hand, the best way to get their attention. I'm going to ask a question or two to get things started while you guys are getting the courage to ask a question and getting the mic over to the question answers. I hope it didn't escape you that these three panelists from very different parts of the state of California are not representing positions that are all that different from one another. Each of these organizations, in fact, passed resolutions to support the Aqua Statewide Water Action Plan, which includes I'm not saying the, I'm saying a solution to move the intakes in the Delta. So I was certainly hearing our Northern California representative, Jim Pfeiffer, reach out to say, let's sit down and solve some of these problems. So with that, my question sort of to the trio of you is, are we moving in that direction? What's going on to try and resolve the differences between Aqua's Northern California members and those that are trying to make something happen in the Delta? Jeff?
Head start. I think we've made a lot of good progress the last 6 months or so. We've resolved some of the protests you've talked about. We've resolved issues with Contra Costa County, for instance, along an area that's not popular with importing or exporting water to Southern California. But we sat down with their water district and resolved their issues primarily around water quality and put that protest to bed. We're having that same conversation with north of Delta farming interests, and we resolved probably about 90% of our disagreements with them on how the project would operate, and I'm hopeful that will also be put to bed shortly. So slowly but surely, we're working with other water districts throughout the state and resolving the issues on the Cal Water Fix program. At some point, the issues become political and not technical, and then it's probably not up for water agencies to resolve them amongst themselves, and we'll see if at some point if the governor and the legislature can pick up some of those. But made quite a bit of progress in the last 6 months in terms of resolving some of those.
Brent, Jim?
I'd agree with what Jeff said. I think the conflict comes from the forum that we're currently in at the State Water Resources Control Board, a quasi-judicial body with ex parte rules and lawyers practice before it. So it has all the connotations of conflict. But I would note that even though it does, all of the settlement work that we've done that Jeff just described, I think there are currently in the works 8 or 9 different settlement efforts with the same folks that are in those state board hearing processes have been successful, and I expect they probably all will reach some degree of success. So in spite of the controversial and acrimonious nature of the state board, the water agencies are still able to work with each other to come to resolutions that minimize that conflict. And so that is another reason that gives me some optimism.
Jim?
So I'm heartened by those words, and they are, the export regions are doing that, and we have been having those discussions. A number of agencies in Northern California continue to discuss this. I agree with Brent that it does sound acrimonious, but there is an opportunity for negotiation and resolution, and we look forward to that.
Jim, you mentioned that there's a lot of differences amongst Northern California entities. I mean, is it your impression that the vast majority, most of them, are trying to get to yes, or are most of them trying to just stop things?
I would say that a large portion that are outside the Delta, up the Sacramento Valley, Feather River, American River, they are really interested in finding a solution which protects their water supply needs and also make sure that Southern California and the San Joaquin Valley can continue to get water supplies. The Delta is sort of in a different place, and it's my suspicion that it's going to be tough work, and they may not ever yield on California water fix. Now, one last thing
I do want to point out, folks in that part of the Delta are not Aqua members.
Maybe there's a model, though. One thing I'd like to offer is Sacramento County, which is going to be the location where the intakes get built. They were opposed to East Bay mud diverting off the Folsom South Canal years ago, and Sacramento County was able to stymie the efforts of East Bay mud, building an alternative water supply for that service area. And it was the leadership of Dianne Feinstein who seemed to lock all those people in a room until they came up with a solution. Maybe that's an opportunity. I don't know, but it may be also a step too far for Sacramento County.
Okay, I'm really wanting to look for it. I want the mic guys roving out there. Somebody out there must have questions. Here we go. Diane Mahmood. Hello, Diane. How are you? Long time, no talk.
Mr. Pfeiffer, this question is for you. We are challenged in Southern California by what I believe is a persistent and erroneous perception of Northern California is that the water is just going from Northern California to Southern California to fill pools. And we have been really seriously engaged in water conservation and in developing local water supplies such that we have been able to successfully weather the drought of the past 5 years. What do you think can be done to alter that perception of Southern California water use? And as a follow-up question, have you completed the installation of retail water meters in the north?
Two good questions, and I'm glad you asked the second one. So it's funny because we complain about Southern Californians saying that in Northern California they're just a bunch of water wasters. I think what we need to do is continue to educate the public that this is a statewide issue, that we all need to reduce demands. And we also need to acknowledge that Southern California should be given a lot of credit for the water conservation that they have done, and make that heard. Also, you guys are a little ahead of us, admittedly, but we are continuing to improve water use efficiency. We are committed to that. I think it's a message that we need to spread together and dispel myths. Lastly, our water meter installation program will be done by the year 2020. Our city council has adopted a program and increased the funding to make sure that program gets done before the year 2025 or ahead of 2025. They raised rates significantly for ratepayers 2 times around. I have to say that the city council took the courageous step in the height of the recession to increase rates substantially in order to move the water meter program ahead of the schedule, and did it again recently to put even more money into it to make sure we get done by 2020. Along with that, we are also installing automated meter infrastructure, and that way we can allow customers to better manage their water supplies, that we can allow them to detect leaks. So we take this seriously. Getting back to your first question about dispelling myths, I think we all need to get together and work on that. It doesn't serve any of us well to have that persist. It's throwing each other under the bus. And once again, we need to work together on these issues, because if we're not united, we're going to be in trouble.
Other questions? Yes, right here, this gentleman. Okay, you've got a loud voice, but why don't you wait for the mic anyway? Thank you.
For all of the students that are in the room,
Welcome, by the way. Wonderful to have you here.
what advice would you give to the students that are thinking of pursuing a career in water?
Go ahead, guys. I'm probably going to
Yeah,
want to add something myself.
I'll handle that because I'm way overeducated because I was afraid to get a job, so I just stayed in school too long. I have a degree in environmental planning. I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and I also have a law degree. And they have all served me well, but they illustrate what I view as the 3 corners of the water industry. There are always biological issues. So biological degrees are a good way to pursue a water career. There are always going to be engineering issues. Engineering is a good way to pursue a water career. And there are always going to be legal issues, legal and legislative issues. So any one of those paths will lead you comfortably into a water career, and actually quite a good one. So I think that the idea that you have a one path to follow to work at a water agency, and many of you probably do work at water agencies and have a variety of degrees yourself. So you can see there are multiple number of paths you can take to get there, and all of them can provide the kind of education you need to be successful in the water career. I hope that's helpful.
Jim, Jeff?
I would also suggest to searching out for those apprentice programs and such at water agencies. There's quite a few. That would be something. There's many of those, and lots of water agencies have them. The city of Sacramento has a number of them. That way, students can figure out if they like this as a career, where to go, and it also helps to get their foot in the door for permanent employment.
Metropolitan has a lot of programs that I think are all good. We have a lot of internships. I think internships are terrific. We also have an apprentice program. People always think, I got to get my college degree and I've got to get into this from the higher education standpoint. We struggle mightily with getting skilled craftsmen, skilled laborers. These are great careers, and we have actually set up our own apprenticeship programs to start training people because we just can't find them anymore. And so we've had to start developing our own apprentice program. We graduate about 30 to 40 trained journeyman mechanics every year out of our own apprentice program, so we can home grow our own, just because there aren't that many people going into those careers anymore. So there's a lot of different ways to attack this issue, and a lot of great jobs in the water field, even if it's not always the most sexy and exciting field, but it's a good field.
In fact, it can be sexy and exciting too.
Not really, no. Nice try, but no.
It depends on what your interests are. If you're at that stage where we all were many years ago and you're trying to decide is water or something else, you can certainly be fulfilled elsewhere, but there are tremendous opportunities in this industry, in part because of the changes that have been described for you here. How many projects did you hear about? How many different agencies did you hear about? What's happened in the last 30, 35 years is everything used to happen with the state and federal government, building these massive engineering projects, and your job down here in Southern California was to hire one guy with a part-time helper to be the contract agent to receive the water. Okay, maybe the water use is a little bit more involved than that. But today, water management is happening at the local level, at the regional level, and that's opening up tremendous opportunities in ways I don't think we ever dreamt of at the beginning of my career. So if you have the tiniest bit of interest, give us a look. And you might also give me a card, because one of the things that my organization is doing, actually Kathy Teagues, who was on a panel earlier today, she's the president of ACWA, she's chairing a task force on how do we get that new generation of young people into our field and then move the current young ones up, because most of I'll accept Pfeiffer, he's still a youngster, but the rest of us probably not going to be sitting on these couches 10 years from today. And for some of them, it ain't going to take anywhere near 10 years. So I'm speaking in particular, never mind. Anyway, another question right here, D.
Yeah, let's move on quick.
Here's a softball. Here's a softball for Keitlinger.
I'll try to give you a softball. No, it's actually for the whole panel. My question is, I think we see agency managers trying to work together across the state, and more we see that everybody's trying to solve a problem. My question is, will politics undo the solutions that you all are trying to come together on? And if there's a risk of that, what do we need to do to try to avert that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start there, and Jeff can add in as well, so can Jim. I don't think it will. I don't think politics will undo solutions, and the reason is that politics, frankly, in my view, is always looking for solutions. If a group of water managers come together and they can develop a solution and it needs any kind of legislative assistance, but they take it to the legislature, ready-made for solution, with all people agreeing or most people agreeing, that's a solution that a politician wants to see, wants to foster, and wants to help happen. So I don't think politics gets in the way of it as much as it does facilitate it, provided that the water managers have done their job in advance. So that would be my response.
Well, the only thing I would add is, if you've been watching Congress the last few years, we are very gridlocked in this country. Every presidential election is within a whisker of each other because we're at 51-49 margins on every issue. And it goes on social issues, it goes on our business issues. So Congress gets pretty gridlocked pretty easily. California, we're a nation state. We're kind of a microcosm of the rest of the country. And so Sacramento can also get that way. And water is one of those issues that does tend to gridlock people at that political level. They really hate to impose solutions from the top down. So then the answer means us water managers have to propose solutions from the bottom up. I don't know that the politics would stop it if we did get a growing consensus among water managers on how to do it, and that becomes our job then, because I don't think Sacramento can grapple with it. It's too divisive, and it's going to have to come up, it'll have to come bottom up.
Jim, anything to add? What about the what?
Yeah,
The
and
ballot.
what about the ballot?
Prop 53?
We love doing initiatives in California. What do we have, 17 on the ballot this time around? And usually they're incredibly well thought out and with no lasting repercussions. This election, no different, and that's usually not the way to solve things is by the ballot, but voters get frustrated. They don't see any action. They don't see solutions, and so they just toss something on the ballot. And usually we tend to regret those solutions. So again, I think it's up to us to get ahead of the curve, propose solutions. You have Prop 53 this time around. In my view, not very well thought through solutions to some of the growing problems in California. But if we don't find solutions amongst ourselves, frustrated voters will grasp at other solutions.
I agree.
I've got a related question, and then we're going to wrap up. It's not politics that might unravel this, but the Endangered Species Act biologists seem a wee bit out of control to those of us that manage water. The 200,000 acre feet for outflow in summer, and you point to them that there's no scientific basis for that. And what the argument that I've been getting back is, but it's so close to extinction, we don't need science. A hunch ought to be good enough. Well, those hunches are very expensive. Similarly, last week, the State Water Resources Control Board put out proposed regulations on the San Joaquin River that would dramatically increase required flows. Do those things bring us closer together, or do they push us apart?
They don't help. That's my view, and that's because I have a bias towards the water managers solving the problems versus regulatory agencies solving the problems. But the bottom line is that unless we provide that science, which is why I wanted to make it part of my presentation this morning, unless we provide that science, an odd thing for us to do as water managers is to step into the scientific realm. But the bottom line is that playing field has been vacated by the regulatory agencies, in my opinion, and so we have to fill that void. We have to provide that quality science that can allow agencies to understand, regulatory agencies, to see it, have it handed to them on a silver platter, they can understand it, and then act on that rather than the hunches, as Tim mentioned.
Frankly, that's what we did 20 years ago with the Bay Delta Accord, and it worked then. Jim? And then I am going to get a question from the audience.
This proceeding that you're talking about, I referenced in my remarks, this Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan and the other elements of it. It's going to be a tough nut to crack for us, but we do need to get together, as Brent said, and solve this as water agency managers and bring a solution forward in order to make sure that water supplies, both to Northern and Southern California, are not impacted. It's probably one of the biggest things that could affect it, and we do need to get together and solve that issue.
Another job for Dave Boland, for those of you who know Dave Boland. A question from the audience, and I'm going to make some closing remarks, then we're going to get Brian up here for the lottery, and then we're going to be done.
Okay, somewhere in the last year I read that the Delta smelt was actually historically an invasive species. Is that true? And if it is, why are we protecting it?
I don't believe it's true. It's an indigenous species, and so it gets full protection under the state and federal Endangered Species Acts.
Yeah, I think Tim's right. I once looked this up because I had that same question. The Delta smelt that we deal with is at the absolute southern end of its range. So that tells you, if you know anything about biology, what that tells you is that it's at the maximum extent of its survivability to begin with. So it's probably always been on the edge. But when I looked at it, what I saw was that there's actually an arc of smelt relatives that go from the Bay Delta all the way over to somewhere in the Japanese islands. And that tells me that it is actually a native species, but it is a native species that's the end of its survivable range.
We can prove it was born in Hawaii and it is a citizen. Here, yes, that probably was inappropriate.
I thought it was good. Put an end to that rumor once and for all.
Louis, did you have something? Can you bring a mic up to Louis? So I told a fib. Louis is going to get the last comment from the audience. Louis Satina, Cucamonga Valley Water District.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yesterday, I had the good fortune of being on an aqua trip, and we visited the UC Davis Smelt Research Facility at Tracy, right there by Clifton Court Forebay. And they can produce 40,000 smelt in no time. And at that same facility, they had out a handout that showed the count population of the smelt, and virtually on the graph, you couldn't see it for the last 5, 6, 7 years. Are we ready, and is it time for us to find a collective solution and make a decision that it's time to release those smelt into captivity so that they don't impact the pumps. And that was my first question of the day. I was trying to get the fellow from the Department of Water Resources to tell me why the reservoir storage at San Luis is so low. And it's because we can't operate the pumps at full capacity, even though there's water upstream at Orville and Shasta. So is it time to release those smelts as we do with other species?
So, yeah, right now, obviously, we have endangered species, smelt, at low levels of population, and they were the primary driver this year of shutting down pumping, and the primary driver for why we didn't move wet winter water into San Luis, and this year really unfolded poorly and was, in my view, poorly managed. We have had a proposal to build a smelt hatchery. We have had a number of hatcheries for salmon and other endangered species. And Fish and Wildlife Service was actually very much in favor of this proposal and built it at Rio Visto about 6-7 years ago. And then there was a change in management and they decided they didn't want to do it. It's a very controversial among environmental groups to mix man-grown fish with native-born fish. And so it was opposed by the environmental community, and Fish and Wildlife Service has sat on the proposal for the last 6 years. It's been frustrating to us because if they're on the verge of extinction, we ought to be using every tool in the toolbox, and this one, for a number of reasons, has not been accessed. But we got a new manager of Fish and Wildlife Service in Sacramento, and we're gonna approach him and urge him to start using these tools.
I'll tell you, Louis, whether it includes releasing artificially raised smelt or not, it's hugely positive news that the state is pushing the feds in the direction of a life cycle approach to protecting these species instead of the narrow, relatively small number of tools that they were using before. So I want to a few closing remarks for you. And I want to go back to Dee Zink's question about the ballot, which I interpreted to be asking some fear. Is that a way that people undo what you need in Southern California? I guess I would have, by the way, I'm not advocating going to the ballot. If you go to if you're ever drugged to the ballot on the Peripheral Canal issue, on the Delta issue alone, you'll probably lose. If you go to the ballot to support the governor's California Water Action Plan, I think we would probably win. I'm not advocating that we go to the ballot, but I can tell you in my world, and I touch bases with all different parts of California, there is overwhelming support for a comprehensive plan that looks like the governor's plan. If you pull any single element out of it and try to move it by itself, you're probably in trouble. So, you know, that's kind of the hallmark of the, I've sat listening to this panel, to the previous panels, and again, I want to compliment the people who put this on, the San Gabriel Valley WaterForum. This has been a really, it ran over, and I think it was worth sitting here and listening to it for a little bit longer. I sorted through it before I sat down at lunch, 5 elements for success from Aqua's perspective that we all need to do north and south. The first is we have to work together. That came through time and time again. There is no doubt in my mind that we can do that. North and south, you can't stop with the water managers. You got to reach out to the business community, to the agricultural community, to the labor community, to the NGOs that you can work with. It's not a long list, but there are some of them. But we have to hang together or we will hang separately, in the famous words of Benjamin Franklin. Second, Professor Bill Blomquist, whose remarks I really thought I learned a lot about, he points something really important out. Institutions count. And our institutions right now, both state and federal government, they are compartmentalized. They don't act in unison. We need to get back to the way they were behaving some 20 years ago when we did the Bay Delta Accord. The federal government had formed something they called Club Fed. The state government had a water policy council. They forced themselves to speak with one issue. In those days, before the state board staff would have come out with something that would have upended co-equal goals and a lot of other things, they would have had to go through a policy review process and probably wouldn't have survived. So I think we need to get back to much more coherent decision-making certainly by the federal government, probably by the state government as well. Third, there've got to be open and transparent processes, particularly with respect to science. This is a point that Brent was making. When you're doing your science down in a silo and you know what your political view is going in, it's not hard to predict what the science is going to be coming out. We are victims of that, and they need to open that process up the way they did in previous administrations. Fourth, to state the obvious, you've got to focus on comprehensive solutions, not on individual pieces of the puzzle, but on the whole puzzle. That's hard. One time I was taught one of the most valuable lessons in my career, sometimes to solve a problem you have to grow it. That was in the negotiations for the Monterey amendments of the state water contracts. And you grow this by looking at a statewide comprehensive plan together where you've got a good chance of keeping a broad coalition in agreement. And last, it has got to be about co-equal goals. We care both about water supply and our economy. That sounds like a no-brainer, doesn't it? Well, we get decisions out of state and federal agencies on an almost daily basis, and you cannot for the life of you figure out what it has to do with the policy of co-equal goals. And we need to get government back to where it's focusing on co-equal goals. And everything that it does is trying to move us towards that, not away from it. And the state board actions, the ESA actions we've mentioned, are good examples of decisions that move us farther away from co-equal goals and not closer to it. Most of you know me to be an optimist. Hey, Brian, you want to start making your way up here? And I definitely am, but I'm seeing more possibility for hanging together than I am possibility for falling apart. So before Brian does the lottery, let's thank our panelists. Thank you, guys. Much appreciated.
I think they deserve a big hand because some of the things that was discussed up here, come on. Just real quick, only because we're in the building and we were talking about apprenticeship, trying to get the young men and women that are out there. This place right here, we've been supporting it, the Southern California Water Utility Group, and through the San Gabriel Valley Association, the members of that group, they've been supporting it's through the Learning Center right here in town, actually right here on the property. We are training young men and women that don't know what they want to do or where they want to go. We're training them right here at the tune of 40 to 50 every year. And they're going out into the marketplace. And I know there's a number of the water districts and agencies that are out here that are picking these young men and women up. And they're coming out of the classes that we're putting on here. They're coming out with a grade 1 and a grade 2. They can't get their grade 3 in treatment or distribution until they actually go to work. But they can take the test, and we've been doing that. That's my pitch. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this down, and I'm going to have Tom take one out, or Tim take one out, and then I'm going to have Jeff go right on down the line with Brent and Jim, and each one of them are going to take a ticket. Then I'm going to walk along, and I'm going to pull that ticket. Tim, what's yours? I got 4 gifts. The first one, and it ain't mine. The first one, I heard Ty talk about this a little while ago. We have the books. I think he said these are worth about $500, didn't you, Ty? Okay. Anyway, the first number, last 3 digits, 452. 452. Now, I know I saw some badges out there, and this could be one of them. All right, we'll let that one slide. Do I hear any takers? 452, last number. Okay, next one is 474. 474. Like I said, there were some no-shows, and these could be them because we pull them off the back of your badge and they go right in the pot. 474. Well, this is not working out well. Let's see if Brent has any better luck. I think so because it's a low number. 294. There you go. I expect you to go home and read all this tonight and come back with more questions. Okay. All right, Jim's number is, oh man, it's close to mine. 306. 306. And I'm not going to tell you what it is till you come up. 306. All right, Jeff, draw one out of there for me. 434. 434. 4. That's what happens, see, when you have no-shows, those are the guys that win. Give me that bucket. Here you just You guys are wearing me out up here. All right, next number, 426. 426. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, gone. Next number, 497. 497. See, I'm getting nervous because the young lady back here is looking at her watch. 497. Gone. If I draw my own out, I win. 440. 440. And now I'll tell you, it's a $50 gift certificate. See, it paid to get it. There you go, sir. Thank you. All right, real quick. This is for another $50 gift certificate. 418. That's what happens. You don't have your glasses on, too. 418. There you go. There you go, dear. Give me your ticket. You ain't getting away that easy. All right. The last one is a $100 Visa card. 464. Ah. Split it with you? Good man, Chai. All right. I think Tim wrapped it up. I have one question for all of you. Did you think this was worthwhile? Because we're one of the partners. We're one of the partners. All of the partners that are involved, they're all sitting here. And I want to make sure that if you felt it was worthwhile and be discussed again next year, we will be looking at it. It may be a year or every other year, but we're going to put another one on. Thank you very much and appreciate your attendance.